Welcome back. As we mark this Earth Day, the most recent UN report on climate change reveals that countries are not doing nearly enough to prevent global warming from increasing to dangerous levels within most of our lifetimes. The UN Secretary General, in fact, says that the report highlights a, quote, litany of broken climate promises by governments and corporations, accusing them of clinging to harmful fossil fuels. Joining me now is President Biden's special envoy for climate, former Secretary of State John Kerry. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being with us. Happy Earth Day.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Well, this UN report, the co-chair said that if we continue acting as we are now, we're not even going to limit warming to 2 degrees, never mind 1.5 degrees, which is what the U.S. committed to at the World Climate Conference last fall. So are you alarmed?
Well, I'm concerned, and I know President Biden is obviously concerned because he's taken the leadership position of bringing America back as a leader on climate change on a global basis. And he went to Glasgow last year, leading the effort to try to help less developed countries and vulnerable nations be able to adapt, build resilience. He put forward a very serious amount of money in order to help in this transition. The problem is that there have been intervening events, obviously, but also we're fighting a status quo. The president has put forward very bold proposals. He wants a 50 to 52% reduction in emissions within the United States before 2030. He's set us on an extraordinary path for the building of electric vehicles. All vehicles in the United States by 2035 will be electric. He has asked Congress for significant funding in order to be able to invest in good jobs for union workers and others around our country, to be able to build an offshore wind industry, to be able to deploy solar panels. I think the infrastructure legislation that the president succeeded in passing will build some 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations around the country. It will help to clean up pollution. I mean, there are massive commitments that are made, but we need the Congress, what the president has asked them, to pass critical climate legislation that will empower us to move faster and further. So I think the president has offered unprecedented level of leadership in an all-of-government initiative. But the answer is we are still in need of greater effort. And we need the climate legislation to help us be able to accelerate our own initiatives.
Well, you know, let's agree that he has laid out, you know, some extraordinary goals and made some promises, and that Congress does hold a lot of this in their hands. But there have been some big events like the war and, you know, Russian sanctions, the sanctions on Russian oil. And he's had to go to the strategic reserves and put out more oil because of inflation and to try to keep costs down. He's got a midterm election. He's also gone so far as to authorize something that has really upset the environmental community, which is authorizing more drilling, you know, in places like Wyoming, more oil and natural gas drilling. So isn't that countermanding his own goals and his own promises?
Well, not if you look at it, Andrea, in the full measure of why it's being done and what the opportunities are that we have in front of us here. Is there some additional pumping? Yes, there is, because demand is up, and because with the situation in Ukraine, the United States is going to do everything it can to help our friends who have made sacrifices by refusing to accept Russian gas and oil, and who are now moving even more rapidly to deploy renewables for their own power sectors in their country and transportation in their country. So I don't think, as long as the additional efforts to produce gas are in fact temporary, as long as they are geared to be able to deal with the need for economic stability in order to be able to make the transitions that we need. And I think that the president knows that many of these leases that have been granted are simply not going to be drilled in. We have an oil industry and gas industry in the United States that owns massive number of leases already that have been permitted, and they are not drilling. So I look at this as a temporary measure to try to relieve the price pressure, which is essential to keeping the population committed to moving in these directions. And I think it's understandable. I know the president has changed already behavior in very significant ways. For instance, General Motors and Ford Motor Company have spent hundreds of millions of dollars retooling their plants in the United States so that by 2030, 50% of the vehicles we make in America will be electric. And by 2035, all vehicles we make in America will be electric. That's a massive commitment, which both Ford and General Motors have joined in and are committed to. In addition to that, the president has created an offshore wind industry. We're trying to move on the siting for those assets as soon as possible. And in addition to that, he is seeking tax credits from the Congress that will be able to accelerate the deployment of renewables here in our own country and lower the price of energy for American consumers.
But you've got to get all of that past Joe Manchin. I mean, you've got those obstacles on the taxes, cinema, Manchin, you know. But let me also ask you whether you think it was a... Sorry, go ahead.
There's no secret that yes, there's a critical vote that's needed in the United States Senate. But I know that the administration is still talking to Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is, I think, trying to work with some colleagues to see what can be brought together. So I still hold out hope that Congress can step up and pass critical climate legislation, which I might comment is not, it shouldn't be partisan. I mean, really, this is a matter of national security. It costs us hundreds of billions of dollars to clean up after the now much more intense storms that we're experiencing, which are coming as a consequence of climate change. And the fact is that we would be much better off, and the president knows this and is trying to point this out to Congress and others, if we were to eliminate the need to spend all of that money simply to clean up after a storm, because we have adequately invested in avoiding those storms in the first place.
Let me just ask you, Mr.
Sure,
Secretary, before we run out of time, about whether you found it disappointing that the president did things like the ethanol blend in Iowa for the summer, you know, which is polluting, adding more ethanol to the blend of gasoline.
As I said to you, there are a number of reasons way beyond the control of the United States, way beyond the president's control, such as the war in Ukraine, as well as price push because of COVID. There are a lot of things that are happening. And I think the president is correct to try to take measures to maintain a level of stability in our country, economic stability, political stability, and be able to move forward with support to effect these big changes that move us towards a clean energy economy, which will make the United States of America, indeed the planet, cleaner, healthier, and safer. That's the result of what the president is trying to do. And I'm convinced that as long as it's temporary, we have to deal with the emissions from gas and oil and coal. We have to. And the president has set a goal of reducing those emissions by 50 to 52% over the course of the next 8 years. To take a few months now to build stability and to be able to continue to have the support of the American people to effect this transition is a critical part of leading. And I think the president has been doing what he needs to do in order to, in the end, achieve our goals. Those are ambitious goals. They're more ambitious than the goals set by any president historically. And already in America, the last year, the fastest growing job in America was wind turbine technician. The third fastest growing job in America was solar panel installer. This transition will create jobs even as it provides for the greater security of our nation.
and certainly offset the supply chain problems with China on the solar panels.